Okay, so Grandpa, you just had your 92nd birthday. Happy birthday.
Thank you.
So, we'll go a little bit from this. So, what's your full name?
Howard Lindsay Schuyler. Lindsay is Lindsay.
Now, do you know why? That's like a family name, isn't it?
The name Lindsay was some relative of my grandparents on my mother's side. I don't know just
I
where.
think that was their last name or something, right?
That was their last name, I think, Lindsay. Yes. And then later on, the name Holbrook. Now Hamilton Sand was kind of started by Howard Holbrook, and he was an uncle of my mother's and lived at the village of Springvale, is where my mother lived. Springvale is a little four corners with a school and a church on it and a grocery store, about 2 miles from Hagersville, Ontario.
Okay.
And so he moved from Hagersville, this Dr. Howard Holbrook, and started the TB hospital in Hamilton quite a few years ago now. But that's how the Lindsay name is from back somewhere else, way back somewhere.
Now, what's Uncle Harold's full name?
His is Harold Irvine Schuyler, Irvine, I think. And that Irvine came from my grandmother Schuyler's relatives. And that's how we got named. And my name was Howard because my mother's last name was Howard. Her parents were John Nelson Howard and Jane Holbrook. And that's how we got the name Howard for me, I guess. Yes.
And you're the oldest, right?
By 1 hour.
Woohoo!
That's what they say. So I don't know. My brother was, I think, 5.5 pounds. I was 5 pounds.
Yeah.
Born. But
So, and where were you born? Were you born on the farm like this?
no, my dad was an agricultural representative for the county of Brant. Started in Brant County in 1913, and his job was to get the farmers kind of organized and teach them how to plant better seeds and crops and grow better. And so he was the first one in Brant County. Later on, as he retired, they would place, the government would place somebody else in there. It was a government job. But what was that question?
So where were you born then?
Oh, well, when he got married, he moved to Paris in 1913 and he rented a home in Paris, and his office was in Paris. And so we were born in the home in Paris because there was no hospital at that time. Can't think of anything else, but
And then so
I was
when?
born on May the 20th, 1914. And they were married on the 12th of June, 1913. So it was okay.
Maybe your honeymoon babies.
You never know.
So, okay, tell me about your mom. Because honestly, I don't know much about your mom. I know a lot about your dad, but not about your mom.
I always thought a lot of my mom. She'd spank us if we needed some spanking. I can remember sometimes we'd do something wrong. She says, now when your dad comes home, I'm going to tell him to give you a spanking for that. So he'd come home and she'd tell him, and he'd say, well, I'll go and get a switch off that tree out there. There's a lilac tree that had a lot of little stems growing up. And so we'd go out and get a lilac stick and kind of break it in the middle a little bit so it didn't look broken. But the first time she swatted us, it'd break in two. That was the last of the spanking.
Did she like play any instruments?
Yeah,
or?
she had her ATCM from, I don't know how she got that, whether she went to Hamilton or where, but in music and piano, I guess. Yeah, she loved playing the piano, and she sang, and she'd sing us kids to sleep at night or play the piano for us, you know.
Yeah.
We'd yell downstairs, play this piece, play that piece, and she'd play it, and guess we'd go off to sleep maybe.
Now, I remember my dad telling me, like, when she would curse, she would say something like, by jinx, or something like that. Is that right?
I don't ever remember hearing her say rough words like that.
So, okay, tell me about your dad then. So your dad was the Brant County Agricultural?
Agricultural representative. You know, they had the government of Ontario set up one of these agricultural offices in each county, Brandon, Haldimand, and Norfolk, and Oxford, so on. And he was the one that set up in Brant for the first. He was there for 13 years, I think it was, before he retired. And but after he was there 2 or 3 years, in 1918, he went. We were born in 1914. In 1918, he bought a farm outside Paris, about a mile south, and we moved out to that. And then he had a hired man that lived in the house that across the driveway from the main house, and the hired man looked after the farm while my dad went in town every morning, you see. And it worked out very well. And he always had that hired man until Harold and I got through high school, and we decided to look after the farm ourselves.
Now, when you were little, what kind of chores and stuff did your parents make you do?
We didn't have too much to do until we grew up and got to be 13 or 14, you know, and we let the hired man go, and we were kind of looking after the farm. And he sold all the cattle except we kept a cow, so we'd have milk to use at home there. And then later on, we even got rid of the cow and just bought about 3 quarts of milk from a neighbor nearby. Yeah.
But they didn't work you to the bone?
Well, no, but after a while, he said, now boys, you're getting older, what do you think you want to do? Do you want to try to go to college? And, or would you like to do something with the farm? And, well, it was kind of in the Depression, and we knew we might go to college. So we said, well, let's plant fruit trees and have an orchard. So he knew in the States, around Detroit somewhere, a big nursery where he could buy just kind of wild trees growing up, little trees about that high and little roots on them. And the apple trees, but they weren't any special variety, they were just wild. So we brought those home. We planted 10,000 of those in a kind of nursery rows near the barn, and cultivated them. We planted them 1 year, and they grew up. And then the next year, we hired a budder, a man from Vineland at an experimental station, and he could insert a bud from a Macintosh tree into the base of one of these wild trees. And then after another year, you cut that old stub off that was growing up, and you'd have a nice Macintosh tree. And that's the way we developed all the trees in our orchard, pear trees and apple trees and so on. And we decided how many rows we'd have of one kind and how many Macintosh and different varieties. And after they grew up to be about 3 years old, then we planted them out. We got all the fences out of the whole farm, 100 acres, and kind of plowed everything up and got it level and smooth. Then we staked out the rows 20 feet apart all the way across the farm with a lath put a lath now because we grew ginseng for a while, and it was all covered with shade. It had to be covered with shade, and it was with these laths. So we took these laths out of these square shades we made and made stakes, so we'd drive down the ground and make our rows both ways to know where to plant the trees, you see. And so about 1938, we planted the whole 100 acres. It took, well, we planted, started in the late summer, and we hired several men, and they dig the holes, you see, and then some others that come along behind and put the right tree in, so we'd have Macintosh here and Delicious here and Spies. And then these trees were 40 feet apart, the apple trees, and we knew that it's going to be a long time before they produce much fruit and give us a living. So my dad says, why don't we put a row of pears right down between each row of apples? And for 5 or 6 years, 10 years, the apple trees won't require the room, and we'll get a lot of pears off those. So we planted pears right down every 20 feet this way and 20 feet apart this way. So there were a pile of trees on an acre then, you see, and they grew up, and we had 2 varieties, Bartlett pears and Kiefer pears. Now the Kiefer pears went to canning factory as well as our Bartletts, but the Bartletts were by far the better. And one year we had 28,000 boxes of hampers of pears.
Wow.
And they had to go to the factory in Brantford quickly. You picked them all out green because get them in the factory, and if they turned yellow and got soft, they were no good. So we had to pick them pretty early. But we gradually got orchards going, and I guess when we got, Nellie and I got married, Harold and Bernie got married, the trees would be, it was 38 we planted, and then we got married in 41, so they had to go quite a long while before there were any pears or apples. But my dad was selling, he had retired from selling, or from being the agricultural representative, and he started selling mutual life insurance, and from Kitchener. And he did a real good job of that. You had to try to sell at least 100,000. If you could sell $250,000, why, so much the better. But some years I don't think he ever got to $250,000, but he sold 100,000 quite each year pretty well. And that's what kept us living till our apples started, you see. So it was quite a struggle to make ends meet, you know. But between him working in the government, why, we did it.
And when did you plant the evergreen trees?
Oh, well, that was 1945. Let's see, Larry was born in 1945. And we started planting those trees about that same year, I guess it was, 1945.
Those are the Christmas trees,
The
right?
Christmas tree. We bought another farm down the road for their 100 acres, and it was sandy, nice sandy soil. That's the type you want for Christmas trees, so they don't grow too fast. So we bought that and planted it out gradually, 10 acres each year. And then after the 10th year, the smaller ones were put in first, are large enough to cut. They'll be 6 to 7 to 8 feet high then. And now some of them will not have grown as fast, so it takes about 3 years before you clean a block off completely. So once you clean that block off completely and sell them to the buyers from the States, then you can replant it again. But in order to replant that, these stubs are all sticking up there. Some of them will be up that high and others will be low, and you couldn't get your planter to go over there because you plant the next row halfway between the trees were 5 feet apart. We put the next rows, the new rows down in the center. And so you had to get these stumps cut off. So we built an arrangement to fit behind the tractor and towed behind the tractor. It had 2 car wheels and tires, and then a kind of a rear end out of a car where these wheels turning would turn this rear end, and then we had a big saw, a round circular saw to fit that, and we put that right around so it was just about 3 inches off the ground. And then when you go forward, these wheels would turn, and that would start the blade moving around and just shear them off so nice and easy. And then we could plant our trees down here. So we cut them off. Well, they grew 10 years, like 1955. My dad died in 1949. So Harold and I were on our own then. And we planted 10 acres every year, so that after 10 years we'd start cutting these 10 off. And sold most of them to the States, the American market. And
How much would you get per tree?
per tree for a number 1, we got $1.75. Compared
It took
with
10
nowadays,
years or whatever. Yeah.
after 10 years, we had to spray them. We had a plane come in from Aylmer, Ontario, with chemical to spray them to stop what they call the European pine shoot moth. Now, when a Christmas tree grows up, it has a central leader, branches out and branches out. But on the central leader, these European pine shoot moths would chew that little center bud off, and then you'd have a crooked tree. So we had to do something about getting spraying those trees. So we understood that there's this firm at Aylmer, Ontario, that would be able to knew what kind of spray to use to kill these pine shoot moths. So at a certain period in June or early July, we hired them to come over and spray the orchard. You swoop over it and you spray the one section, go back, until you got the whole 100 acres sprayed. And that pretty well killed them down, so the trees grew straight. And then the trees, a lot of them, we could see they're getting to spaces between each layer of limbs like that, and you want them nice and close so we started prune. We pruned one year a dozen or 2 trees, cut the central leader off at 11 inches, about that high, 11 inches, and maybe cut the branches off a little bit too. And that tree the next year, well, that tree that same year, after you cut it off in early July, it would send out about 6 little shoots on the buds on the side, and they would, the following year, would form limbs then in the central leader. So that's the way we controlled the bugs. And they grew nice trees, and we had quite a percentage of number 1s. Now the number 2s only around about $1.25 or something. That was a story on the Christmas tree situation, but
Now, Jennifer was asking you about your dad. What kind of person was he?
well, he's a perfect dad. I don't think anything wrong with him. No, only he had to spank us once in a while when my mother told. I bet that was a hard job for him to spank us when he didn't know whether or not.
And how many spankings did you get?
Oh, I don't think we got too many. But,
So you and Uncle Harold wouldn't get up to a lot of mischief or anything?
oh, you never got into a thing.
Oh, never.
No. Oh, boy.
Which made me wonder why she would have him get a switch once in a while. They were so good.
So now, do you know how your mom and your dad met?
No, I don't really. They lived about 8 miles apart, I think. My dad lived near Jarvis, my mother not too far from Haynesville. I remember he said he used to go over to see her on a bicycle. And it was 8 miles, and the roads weren't very smooth. He said one night he was coming back and the darn bicycle got a flat tire. He just picked the bike up and threw it in the ditch and walked home. Ah, boy. But no, I don't really know how they met.
Now, were there a lot of other family members living around the area?
Well, my dad had a cousin, first cousin, Delbert Schuyler, that lived over the one road south of where our farm was, near this Bethel church that was over there, United Church. He lived on a farm there, and Delbert Schuyler's sister was named Hazel Schuyler, and she, her name was Hazel Osbrook, I think, first, but no, she married in Osbrook. But they lived over on this next road. That's about the closest neighbors, you know, the relatives. The others all lived about 25 miles over. It's at Waterford. And our orchards are about 25 miles from Waterford. So we just gradually got to know the kids at school, you know, the high school kids. I remember names of a lot of them. There was, I was trying to think of them today. There was Clarence Moss, Llewellyn Depew, Pat Telfer, Marshall Deans. Those were all kids that were farm boys, and we all ate our dinners together at school. And so we got to know them all pretty well. But you know, every one of those guys are dead. There's just Harold and I out of that group. The others have all passed away in the last few years. Yeah.
So maybe there's something in the pesticides you were spraying in the fields.
Maybe we got the right medicine or something. But they were all farm kids, you know, and so they bought their lunches in the same as we did.
Now, I like your story of how you would get to school. That you had like a horse and a buggy or something?
We rode bicycles. It was 3.2 miles from our place to the high school, because the high school was on the opposite side of town, on the north side of Paris. And so we rode in the summertime, we rode bicycles all the time. But once it came cold weather in the fall, and maybe little snow flurries and so on, we had an old horse that we used to use for cultivating through between the trees and so on. And we hooked him up to a buggy, and the buggy had a good sized top on it. People could look in at it. We felt so ashamed riding an old horse, driving to school with a horse and a buggy. We wouldn't take a cutter in the wintertime. Some of them had cutters, the kids that lived around there, and they'd come whipping in there. But our old plug, he'd jog along, and we had a switch. We'd tap him on the hips once in a while. But we rented a stall in a kind of a garage nearby the high school, so that we'd take the horse in there and leave it all day, and then take it home at night. We'd unhook the horse from the buggy and take him in there. Well, then this one Clarence Moss, he had a nice little, more of a pony, but anyway, he rented the stall next to us. Now there's just a big kind of a pole about that big, hanging on a rope, and I think the front of it leaned over the manger, and that was what separated the two animals. Gosh, we came out from school one night, and there was blood all over the ground and on this horse, and they must have got kicking or something, got this pole down, and his horse was really, had a gash on it about that long on his hip, and a spread that wide in the middle and about that deep. Gosh, I thought the horse was going to die. It bled all over, but Clarence took his horse home. I'm not sure whether they ever come home with it back to school with that horse or not. But that's the trouble we had with our horses. Oh boy. First started school in kindergarten, well, not kindergarten, primary. We started out to this country school where all farm kids were supposed to go. But my dad was going every day into the office in Paris, you see. And so he went north, and we had to somehow or other get south to go to school. It's 2 miles away. So he says, I think I'll see if I can get you into Paris. Come with him in and out. And we were just little kids, 6 years old. So he tried to get us into school, and they said, no, you've got to be a property owner. So we bought a lot in town. And that way then, I think he paid $350 for the lot. Anyway, that way we were allowed to go to school in Paris. But I do remember going to this country school, and it was called Purley School. I think a man by that Mr. Purley donated the land years before. A nice little red brick school across from the church. But anyway, we were playing hide and seek around one day out in front. And Harold and I would only be 6, but anyway. Harold ran one way around the corner of the school, another kid come the other way, and they crashed right on the corner, put a gash up over Harold's eye about that long, and it kind of spread apart, and blood was all over his face, and the teacher got a rag or something on my piece of face. She said, boys, Howard and Harold, you better head for home, I think. You better not play around with that. So we headed off for home, and there's no phone around in the school. So we got home, I guess, without too much trouble, but that was the worst accident we had around that school. And what was I saying about just when you were talking there before?
How about Queenston Heights?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. My dad would take maybe 5 or 6 boys, kind of teaching them about different things, you know. They were country kids. And he'd take us up to go out to the college, Ontario Agricultural College at Guelph, and show us all around there.
And that's where your dad went to university.
Yeah, that's where he got his college. And one time, he took Harold and I and about 3 other boys down to Niagara Falls to show them Niagara Falls and Brock's Monument. And we went up to the top of, we stayed in Welland the first night, drove down as far as Welland. And then it wasn't too far from Welland. The next day I went out to Brock's Monument, and I was sick. Gosh, I was sick that morning. I don't know what I'd eaten, but anyway, I wasn't feeling very good. Well, he says, I'll carry you up. So by gosh, he carried me to the top of Brock's Monument. And I was 6 years old. I must have weighed quite a bit. But he got me up there, and I remember looking out, looking at all the falls and all countryside. I was quite a boy.
Do you know how many steps it was to the top?
I thought it was a couple 100 steps, maybe. Yeah, this was high. Yeah. But
Nice
he's a good dad.
And how did you like your teachers at school?
Well, I remember once when I was in public school in town there, we had a man teacher. He was actually our Sunday school principal and when we went to church there, but he was a school teacher, and I was in his class, and we were in the entrance class just before we left that school. And we had a school garden out by a house next door, and I guess, I don't remember planning it, but anyway, we went out, he took the whole class out to see all about it. And I guess a bunch of us boys didn't pay much attention to what he was saying. We kind of stood back and talked maybe. So he sent another guy and me into the school. He says, you get in there and I'll have a talk with you. Gosh, he strapped us both. And the strap gives us 2 cracks on each hand, and that wasn't very nice, but he thought it taught us, and I guess maybe it did.
Was it with a belt or like with a ruler?
It's a belt, about that wide.
A strap, a regular
about
strap.
that long. And boy, he'd sit up and give you a real crack. And I went to another teacher, she was a woman teacher, Miss Nicholson. and she was the principal of the old high school where we went to for a while. Anyway, she gave me a strapping for what the deuce was it. But anyway, she'd kind of take about 3 steps forward and then bring the strap down. And if she didn't hit me right up to there, if she'd only hit me there, but gosh, my arm was black and blue for a week or two. That kind of hurt, you know.
That's awful.
Yeah, I don't know what that was for. It was
Something silly,
It couldn't have been
probably.
anything very bad because I wouldn't do anything bad.
Well, even when I went to school, I remember they would have what's called a razor strap. And it was a long strip of leather, about
Yeah.
that wide, that they used to sharpen straight razors on in barbershops. And they had those in all the classes.
Oh yeah, that's
And that's
all
what
it
they
was. It
used
was
to strap the
That's
children.
strap.
It was cruel and inhuman, I think.
Wow. Guess I lucked out.
Well, you had another lady teacher that,
Miss Gibson.
no, you were much younger than that then. She was asking you for definitions. Remember the definition was dirty?
Oh, yeah, she was asking her definitions of words. This Miss Gibson, and she'd say a word. Now, give me a sentence with that word in it. And this, I forget what was the word though I said.
Dirty?
Yeah. She says, dirty. And I said, your face is dirty. And the guy, she says, you get out in the hall there. I didn't know, I just, sentence come into my head.
Maybe you'd heard it before. Maybe your
I
mom
don't
told you
know,
that.
I got into trouble so easy and I was never wrong.
Okay, now tell me about the house you grew up in, out on the farm. Like, you wouldn't have electricity, would you?
Well,
Or
no, we didn't. Now in Paris, where we lived for the first till we were 4 years old, there was, I remember in the kitchen, there was just a one bulb hung down from the ceiling. And that's all the lights I remember being turned on anyway. And my cousin from Hagersville, his name was, last name was Howard, I forget, he was just 2.5 years old. He drowned in the spring in a ditch out by the road. He got away from his parents and fell in there and drowned. So my parents went to the funeral in Hagersville, and we had a nurse, another woman that stayed with us and helped my mother. Her name was Florence. So she stayed with Harold and I and kept us while they went to the funeral. And they stayed overnight down at my grandmother's. And this light went out. And that's just all I remember. The earliest I think I remember anything was when this light went out. It was kind of something strange to us, and you know. But another time, before we left the house in town, when we were 4 years old, we had a paper boy that delivered the newspapers, and he'd bring them to the door and put them in a box or something. And Harold and I had a nice little red wagon, and if he didn't steal that wagon on us, and he ran up the street with the wagon, and we watched him go, and we were feeling pretty sick, but my dad knew where he lived, and when he came home, we went up and got our wagon back. So that's about the earliest things that I can remember. So I think we'd be, when that light went out, I think we'd only be about 2.5 because we were about that much younger than this cousin of ours. Yeah.
now, did you have telephones?
I was thinking about that today. I don't remember any phones. Of course, we left at 4 years of age in town. I know we had a telephone after a while in the country, but whether we had Red Star or not, we had no electricity, no. That didn't come till 1932. The hydro, there were big poles went across along the road, across in front of our place, but they were high voltage, 110,000 volts or something, so that we couldn't get hooked into that. And Harold and I finished high school in 1932, and that year was the very year that they put a line through a lower power for the farmers. And so then from 1932 we hired a guy from town that knew all the wiring homes, and I know I helped him drill holes in the plaster. And it was a little different. They had 2 electric wires they put through the beams up in the attic, and they weren't joined together with a plastic cover. They're just kind of separate wires. And you push these wires through these holes in the beams, and there's kind of a little porcelain insulator. You put in the hole in the beam and then put the wire through it. So it was kind of insulated. It was pretty good. But I think to wire our whole house was only $90, you know. It was pretty cheaply wired. But it gave us electric lights and so on, and we were quite happy about it. And then we could have a radio, and we could have electric stove, and I was naming the different things here.
What about a refrigerator, because that was a big item?
Yes, we had an electric refrigerator. I remember we got that, and we could put in a pump and have a pump for our water for bathroom, and then we put in bathroom facilities and so on, and it just made all the difference in the world once we got electricity.
Did you ever have an ice box in your house?
No, because ice, you had to get it from town or somewhere. No, but we had electric lights then, and our house had 4 bedrooms, but after we got electricity, we took the smallest bedroom and used it for a bathroom and cupboards on the sides of the wall and so on. And then we put in a furnace. It burned fuel oil, and you had to have electricity, of course, to light it and so on, and for the thermostats. So it made all the difference in the world. After 1932, we could kind of advance a bit.
Before you had the bathroom, did you have an outhouse or
There's
privy?
just an outhouse out behind me, yeah.
That wouldn't be nice in the middle of winter,
Yeah.
would it?
I remember we had a wooden pathway that went out there, and you'd have to kind of keep the snow shovel off it and so on. And
But you didn't necessarily go out there in the middle of the night if you needed to go to the bathroom.
no,
What
yeah.
did you do then?
you had a pot on the
The
bed.
bedpan.
Yeah,
A round pot, a chamber pot?
yeah. Oh boy.
So, something I don't know much about is you had a sister, right?
Yes, Doris. She was our sister, and she was 2.5 years younger, and she got what do you call it?
Pneumonia?
Once she got not a degree, but you went through business
What are you
college.
talking about?
Business college, so you could type and do those kind of things.
Yeah.
And got a job in Brantford, and boarded at the YWCA, and then she met a chap from Waterford, which was near my grandparents, Schuylers. They moved after they quit farming and moved into Waterford, and so she married this chap, and he was a conductor on the railroad, on the Lake Erie or Northern Electric line that went from Port Dover to Kitchener, I think it was, through Paris. And how they got together, I don't know, but they got married and lived at Port Dover, and she got leukemia when she was 75 years old and died, and then he lived a few years longer, but he passed away too. But
And then you had another sister too, right?
no.
Didn't you have one?
Well, the baby sister,
Yeah.
baby sister, she was born in 1925, and died with pneumonia in February of the next year. You know.
She's
I
only
can
a
remember
couple
the casket was a little white casket about that long, about that high, and they didn't have a hearse. They just had a kind of a car with glass windows in it, you know, more of a sedan.
Yeah.
And they put this in on the back seat, the little coffin, and the roads had to be plowed out. There was a lot of snow, and they had to be plowed out and pretty rough, and we were in my dad's car coming along behind the hearse, and this car that had the casket in it, it would bounce through these holes and back and forth, and we were kind of thinking, well, what's that, whether it'll be upset or what, but they got the cemetery all right.
Can you imagine how busy his mother was? She had twins, and when they were 2, she had another baby.
one.
Yeah.
So is that youngest one, is she buried in the Paris cemetery
Yeah.
then?
Mhm. She's buried in the Paris cemetery where Nellie is buried. Yeah. My parents are buried there. Yeah.
Now when you were little, I'm sure you had toys to play with, so what was your favorite toy?
Well, I was trying to think what they would. I think the nicest toy Harold and I ever had was this Meccano set. You know, that was kind of little piece of rod and iron and wheels, and you could
Precursor
make
to
airplanes.
Legos.
You could make airplanes, or you could make a windmill and then crank it and make the blade turn. And
Yeah.
oh, it was great. You kind of learned a lot about molding things together, I guess, but.
And you could add to it
Yeah,
each year the
each
same as
year
you can with a Lego
They
set.
give us
Oh, okay.
another bigger, more
Another
important set.
Set
So
of pieces or something?
I think your dad still got that set. He must have it up in his attic somewhere.
Oh,
in
maybe.
a box about so big, a wooden box.
And one Christmas you were thrilled because your dad gave you a little motor that would make these
Oh
things
yeah,
run.
he got us a motor, just and a one cell battery, you know, one and a half volt. And guys had to run the things, and we put it on a little wagon and make the wagon go, and oh, it's great. Yeah, that's where we got our liking for machinery, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
Now I saw something on your paper about, did you have any pets? I saw you had one called Fido or something.
oh yeah, well, I had named some pets here. When we moved to the farm, Dad bought a black spaniel. We called him Pat, and he grew to 6 or 7 years old before he died. We had a lot of different dogs, but I remember there's Skipper and Cleo, and some of the dogs would learn to do things, tricks. You know, we had one dog that if you had a visitor come to see you, and he's liberal, say, you'd say to your dog, Pat, what would you rather do, be a liberal or a dead dog? Gosh, he'd roll right over on his side dead. And if the guy was he knew he was a conservative, you'd say, would you rather be a conservative or a dead dog? Go right over. Oh, we got a lot of laughs over that dog.
Jennifer also might like to know about your early singing career. When you went
Well, when we went to a granddad's, Granddad Schuyler's, he would, every morning, he took his milk cans that he'd milked out of the cows the day before and load them on what he called his milk wagon. Then he'd go to the neighbors and pick up their milk, and the neighbors down the road. So we would go with him when we were down there for maybe a week of a holiday. And every morning we'd get on the wagon and ride along with him, and then he'd sing these songs to us. And that's where we got to learn them. The one was, what did I say to her?
Was it Kaimo Caro?
Kaimo Caro. Kaimo Caro del Toshero Kaimo Terem Tem Pam Ra Rala Big Rig Rig Tam Malamashakaimo. He'd sing that over and over to us till we got it right on. Oh, so we knew it pretty good.
Well, you had another one about
There was
Fido.
another one, what was that?
Fido?
Oh, yeah. I had a dog, his name was Fido. He was a very intelligent dog. He would stand upon his front legs if you held his rear legs up. Or you could turn it the other way and say he was standing on his hind legs if he held his front. Well, we'd always switch it around. He'd stand on his front legs if you held his. Oh,
But then-
gosh.
And you started making money from your singing.
Yeah, oh yeah, we did. When my dad had the office downtown in Paris, and then we were allowed to go to school down. So after 4 o'clock, we'd come down to the office, which was on the main street, and it was right next to a barber shop. And this barber shop was, a guy would have 2 or 3 chairs in there, I guess, and people would come in. So we'd go in the barber shop sometimes while we were waiting for my dad, because we'd get out at 4 o'clock, he wouldn't leave till 5, so we'd go in there and talk to the barber a little bit. He'd say, how about singing a song? So darn, we'd sing a song. I know it was one of these or something. Anyway, he'd give us a nickel apiece.
Wow.
And then we'd dart out there and down the street about 4 doors to a candy store. Go in there and get an all-day sucker. Sometimes you buy them cheap for a cent, and then you get a big one, gosh, for a nickel. Oh, it was a real big one. That was an all-day sucker. Oh, gosh. We had a lot of fun.
Did you play any sports? Like, did they have teams at school? or
Well, at
anything?
high school, we used to play in the baseball games, but just
Just
at
for-
recess you
yeah.
get together. Never on a team, but I liked playing, not playing, but doing, what do you call it, pole vaulting. Sylvanus Apps used to be a hockey player for Paris, for the Toronto Maple Leafs. He was the captain for several years. He sat right ahead of me in school, and he was a good athlete. Everything he did was perfect. So he and I seemed to like pole vaulting. We'd pole vault. I could get over 9 feet, which is about the height of the ceiling. But he could get over, well, he really got over 20 feet in the Olympics. He was the best one in the Olympics on that. But he was a real nice chap. I always liked him so bad. Yeah.
What about, like, heroes? Did you have, like, any people you looked up to?
I can't say as I had many heroes. I can't really think of.
No
I
one
think
really?
maybe his dad.
Yeah, your
Yeah.
dad.
Well, Harold and I played together a lot at home because we were country kids, and we didn't hang around school afterwards, so we didn't really have too many special friends other than these kids that we met at school.
Okay, here's a question about family dinner. So your mom would probably do all the cooking, right?
Yes, I think she did. We had all our relatives lived quite a ways away. She had Waterford and Simcoe and Hagersville, and so we were about 30 miles away. So in the summer they would come to our place maybe once or twice during the summer, and we'd go down there
Yeah.
2 or 3 times. But no, my mother always cooked the meals and so on. But
Did you say grace before dinner
yeah,
and everything?
well, my dad did. Dad always said grace. Yeah, he was a Sunday school superintendent in Paris for several years, and
Which church did you go to?
went to the Methodist church there. And then when I came to Milton, I went to the Presbyterian. Yeah, but and we quite often went over to the Bethel Church. It was a United Church south of the farm there.
And would you guys do anything special if it was like your birthday? Would you get a birthday cake or?
Well, I guess my mother did. I don't remember too much about that really. Harold and I went up to Guelph in the wintertime quite often to took special courses at the Ontario Agricultural College to learn more about growing fruit and spraying the trees and pruning and so on. And we always enjoyed that in the wintertime. But
Well, you two were very inventive. In the course of doing your farm work, there weren't special machines for these things, so you had to invent your own.
we did make some wagons up and different things and
Didn't you have something to sort the apples, like good ones from bad
graders.
ones
Yeah,
and
we
stuff?
had graders, but we really bought those graders from a firm in Grimsby. They built them and we brought them up and assembled them and used them. We had one for doing pears and our cherries, we had 4 acres of sour Montmorency cherries and about an acre and a half of sweet cherries. But we would put an ad in the paper and let people come from Brantford and Paris and wherever to pick these cherries on their own. We had step ladders and the trees were about as high as that cupboard there, so that a lot of people would pick around the bottom and we'd have a ladder for each tree so one person could pick up on the top. So we could have 20 or 25 trees being picked at the same time if we had that many people come. I remember the first time we put an ad in the paper for these cherries to be picked, and we didn't know how many people would come, and gosh, the cars come in there and they're all lined back from here to the Shoppers Drug Mart over there up the road, not just in our driveway and back to the orchard. They were waiting there and we only had 20 ladders. God, we didn't know. Some people turned around and went home, and different people would come from Kitchener. They saw the ad up there, and oh gosh, we felt so bad about it, but we couldn't. And they were a good crop too. But the birds the robins, gosh, there, and the blackbirds, they liked cherries and starlings, and so we found somewhere in the Niagara Peninsula, I think it was Vineland's Experimental Farm, where they were using machines that sat out under the trees, and every once in a while they explode, and that'd scare the birds away. So we bought one of them and brought it home and got the stuff that went in it, and we put that off. A few days when they're starting to get ripe, then the birds started to get in there. And darn, every time that went off, the birds would just fly out, but pretty soon they'd come back. But this would go off about once every hour, and then you'd shut it off at night again, then turn it on first thing in the morning. But it saved our cherries. Then they'd bring the cherries up to the barn there, and we had a machine that we bought down at Grimsby for pitting the cherries. And it was, you cranked it. You poured a basket of cherries in this hopper, and they'd come down, and then they went into a big wheel about that wide across and about that big around, and there's holes all over for just the size of a cherry. The cherry would drop in that hole, and then a punch when they got punches were down through there and punched that cherry and that pit out. You see, they didn't pick them with stems on, picked them without stems. And then the cherries would roll in there, punch this pit out, and then the pit would come out on the ground, and we'd have to gather them up. But that, we charged $1 a basket for pitted cherries. The people pitted their own, we didn't pit them, but what was the name of that welding company that does sort of welding rod? Anyway, they had a contest for anybody that wanted to go to Guelph to tell them what they made with their welding machines and so on. So we'd done a lot of welding around the farm, building racks for bringing the fruit in and different trailers and so on. And so we wrote it up and went up there one day and darn, we got the prize. And we got $500 for ourselves and $500 to distribute to others that we felt deserved. So on, so we did all right that time.
So who'd you give the $500 to? Like
Well,
you kept
I think
500
we kept 500, but we spread the other 500 around here, 100 and there, 100 different ones that we knew and kind of appreciated the work. They were kids that did some welding too, you know.
Yeah. Now, I want to ask you about Grandma.
Grandma,
How did you meet Nellie?
oh, well, Fred Blaney is a cousin of me, and he lives at Kitchener right now. But anyway, he was my dad's sister married this chap by the name of Tom Blaney, and this was his son Fred Blaney, and he became a druggist and had a store in Kitchener until he retired here a few years ago. But he invited us down to, Harold and I, down to skate down there in their church, United Church, out in the country where they lived near Simcoe. It was a big metal place where they keep their horses and so on, and a cement floor. And in the wintertime, they would flood it and have a nice arena. So he invited us down one night and we went down to skate. And Nellie was there with a couple of her sisters. She had 5 sisters. But anyway, that's where I met Nellie. And after that, it was...
It's all
The rest was history.
No,
Did you have any other
we were
girl-
married in about 6 months' time, anyway.
Oh, really?
That was in the January, February, and we got married in August, I think.
So when did you propose?
Oh, well.
Like a month later?
I think maybe. No, I think it was later than that, but maybe June. I think you and I got married.
We'll get to that later.
Oh, boy. What a life.
So did you have many dates with her? Or?
Well, she was nursing. She was a nurse at the Simcoe General Hospital. And so I'd go over there once in a while, about once a week maybe. Not too often, you know, it seemed 30 miles away. That was a long ways away for me. And
Would you bring her flowers or anything like that? Or was that
I don't
corny?
remember that. I don't think I had very much money, to tell you the truth. When I got married, I had $400. So you see, we just worked on the farm and didn't have any money. My dad kind of looked after seeing that we had money to spend, but nothing too much, you know. So he saw we each had $400 when we got married. Just Harold got married 2 weeks ahead of me, and he moved into this house that we used to have the hired man in across the driveway and fixed it all up.
Now, didn't he get married 2 weeks before so he could have the car for his honeymoon, and then
Yeah, then I got the next 2 weeks. And my parents they bought a house in town in Paris, and they had to get it fixed up and so on. And they weren't moved out yet when we got married, so we had to live in another third house that we had on the farm, just a kind of small one-room house that we had an Indian lived in it for
the migrant workers that came to work to help with the crops.
So he helped look after the orchards. So we lived in that for about 3 weeks or so before my parents moved into their house. And then in the upstairs of their house, they fixed it up. You came in the front door and the upstairs went right up there, so they rented that to a couple that just got married in town in Paris. And they got $35 a month for that house.
Woohoo.
Huge sum. but it helped them out. And,
They got $35 a month then.
oh, yeah. Well, she trained at St. Joseph's Hospital. It was a Catholic hospital in Hamilton.
Grandma did.
Yeah. Yeah, and then she came up to Simcoe and got a job in the hospital there. And she was there about, I guess, 2 years before we got married. And
Where did you go on your honeymoon?
we went to Montreal. And, well, we went way up north first and crossed the Ottawa River and came down the other side of the Ottawa. We went up to, what's the park, northern?
Algonquin?
Algonquin Park, and crossed through Algonquin Park, and then down across the Ottawa River and down to Montreal. And she knew a distant relative or something in Montreal, so we went to his place and talked with him for a while. And he always thought Nellie was quite a nice person and so on. He wrote letters to her different times. They were kept in touch, so that's why we went down to call on him as we went through the city, went to Ottawa and looked around the Parliament buildings and so on, and then came back to Toronto. And we had a bed made in the back of the car took out the back seat and then folded down and had a full-length bed in the back and put a mattress in there. And it was great. And so at night we had some groceries and so on, and make our own. We had a Coleman stove. So I only had a little bit of money. I couldn't afford to stay at motels and stuff. So we got back to Toronto, and we decided we'd stay the next night and stay overnight somewhere around Toronto and see the exhibition the next day. So we went out Bloor Street, came out to the west, and we finally got to where Bloor Street was nothing but just a country road and weeds and stuff on both sides. We said, well, we could just pull off the side here and stay and sleep here and go in the morning and be right in the exhibition in no time. So we did, and I guess before we went to bed, anyway, a car come driving in, and it turned out to be the police. They said, what are you doing here? Well, I said, I got out of the car. I said, oh, you're just staying here overnight and going to go in the exhibition. He says, this is a bad place to stay, boy. He says, you ought to really be out of here. Well, then that made Nellie pretty nervous. She sat up most of the night looking out at every car that went by. However...
So you didn't leave and would go somewhere else?
No, we didn't know where to go, and we thought, well, I guess we'll stay in. So, that's the life I led.
I think she must have been a little scared on most of her honeymoon, because I remember you saying about going up to Algonquin Park, and they didn't have outdoor facilities like they would have now. She went back in the bush.
Oh, yeah, and I think somebody stirred her up there. She come running out.
Somebody threw a rock into the bush, and of course she was concerned about the bears, which you naturally would be. And it wasn't a bear; it was a human that startled.
Maybe it's a bear behind. Well, I can't think of what else had you on there.
Was there anything in particular from your wedding day that you remember? Did you get married on the farm or at a church or?
No, we got married in the church that Nellie went to.
Is that in Renfrew or
down
something?
No, it was down at near Simcoe. Yeah, at the church that she went to. Oh yeah, yeah. We got married in this church, and that's when we left to go up around up north there. Then we came back and we lived in this house back the lane there that the Indians lived in for 2 or 3 weeks before we moved into the other home. And we always got along well.
Now, did Grandma and Aunt Verna get along well? Because they would be like practically sisters.
Yeah, well, they didn't ever have any words that I ever knew of. No, we always got along. I remember after our kids were 8 or 10 years old, about 1959, I guess it would be. Larry would be 15 then, yeah, 14. We were kind of thinking that, well, we got 4 boys. Harold's got 2 boys, and I've got 2 boys. And whether 100 acres of fruit and 100 acres of Christmas trees enough to keep us all busy, or whether we should have something else. I had a dream that, gosh, you know, a Canadian Tire store would be a great thing to have. It wasn't like Farm Implement Agency. They always have a lot of old farm implements they have to try and sell. In a Canadian Tire, you never had any of this old stuff to sell. It was all, the stuff was brought right to you by a truck from the head office, and they printed the catalogs for you, and it just seemed to me to look like a great thing. So in the morning, after this dream, I went over to Harold and I said, you know, I had a dream last night. I kind of dreamed that maybe a Canadian Tire store would be a good thing to have. Well, we talked it over, and he says, we suppose we could phone them and ask them if they had any stores available or find out more about it. So we phoned Toronto head office, and they said, well, come on down a certain day. We have the odd store that different dealers are wanting to retire, so we'll talk to you. So Harold and I drove down, and we talked to them, head office. Dean Muncaster, I remember, he was the head CEO, I guess you'd call it, Canadian Tire at that time. He and some of the other head ones. And they said, well, there's a store at Milton that's available, and there's another one down east of Toronto. And at the present time, I can't think of the name of it, but anyway, they said there are those 2 stores. Well, we said we'd go home and think about it. And they said, well, you think about it and let us know. You'd have to have some experience before you took a store over like that. So we agreed that we'd do that. So we went home and talked about it. And Nellie and I Nellie had her sister living right outside of Milton here. Gordon Jefferson, and Eleanor was her sister. And so we kind of thought maybe now Milton would be the town we'd like to get the store. So we phoned Toronto, and they said, well, come on down and talk it over. And so we went down, and they said, well, you can have that store, but you'll have to get training this winter. I guess we went down and saw them in the fall. They said, you have to get training this winter. So they said, go to some of the Canadian Tire dealers around and work for the winter without charging, and you'll get a lot of training. So I saw a chap that had the store in Paris, and he said, sure, you can come in here and teach you what we can. And Harold called Woodstock, and he went to Woodstock every day for a couple months. You see, in the wintertime, you couldn't prune the apple trees until spring, so we had free time. So I went to Paris for 2 months, and Harold went to Woodstock every day, and we learned quite a bit about it. So at the end of that 2-month period, we went down to Toronto again, and we signed the papers to go to Milton. So we came down and saw that. Well, in the meantime, we had come down to see the store, because Eleanor lived out here anyway, and talk it over with the dealer. And well, we had to figure on a price for the store and everything in it. And everything we did, we always settled by flipping a coin, because we were twins, you see. The coin was the best way to decide on something. So we flipped a coin, and as to what the price would be. He wanted something, we wanted less. And so we said, we'll flip a coin, and we were in his office, and he had a lot of books piled up there. Flipped a coin and went right down between two books. So we had to flip that coin over again. But it turned out that his price was what we paid him anyway. So then it was similar. Well, Olive and I, or Nellie and I, came down then in 1960. We took over the store the 1st of July. And we lived in the upper half of the store. There's part of the upper part of the store didn't have anything. Well,
Is that the one just down
you know,
Ontario?
one down
Main?
here in the corner. And there, in one half of the upstairs there was tires and all that kind of stuff. But the other was an apartment. And this chap that we bought it from, he and his wife lived up there. Well, he went to a store in Toronto, in the eastern end of Toronto. And we took that store over in 1960 and moved down there, and Harold looked after the orchards and the Christmas trees and hired some men or two to help him with it, and he'd hire people that knew how to prune the trees, and they cut the Christmas trees and get them hauled out. Well, he had a lot of work to look after, but whatever he made on the farm, whatever I made in Kintyre, it was just lumped together and we split it, which was fair. But to decide who was to go to the farm or go to the Christmas tree or the Canadian Tire, or we go look after the orchards, we flipped another coin. Turned out that Nellie and I came down here to Milton. So Nellie was quite satisfied. I don't think Verna would have ever left home. She was a home girl and wanted to stay there anyway. So it was a good thing it turned out the way it did. But we came down to Milton and looked after the store, and we had were there for 13 years before I retired, and that's when your dad took over the store. Took over the home hardware, and then later on built a new store. But when we had this cottage jointly, I think in 1952, Harold and I bought this cottage up on Horseshoe Lake, and we
Now that was Uncle Harold's eventual cottage, right? The one that was up on the hill?
Yeah, that's the one we bought together. And we were in that till 1965, that's 52. 67, no. The centennial year, 67. We decided that our kids were getting older, we needed more room, so we tossed a coin to see who would move somewhere else. So Nellie and I won that toss. I don't know whether it's winning it but anyway, we were the ones that were to go on further and buy another lot and build a cottage. So Harold paid me for half of what the cottage was worth when we sold it here. And so we went down and bought a lot, about 7 cottages down further, and had a cottage built in 1967. And we enjoyed ourselves down there, and they enjoyed their home too with their kids, and so that's the way.
And then Aunt Ada and Uncle George, they ended up building theirs next door.
They bought a lot 2 or 3 years later next to us. I guess it was maybe the next year. It wasn't 2 or 3 years later. It was the next year, and they had a cottage built by a firm up there, and so what's her name?
Ada?
No, what's her name at Armstrong?
Marilyn.
Marilyn. She bought the cottage from Don, is her half.
Yeah.
So she owns it completely now. Yeah. And
Lots of fun up at the cottage.
yeah, we had a lot of good times at the cottage. I kind of hated to leave it, but we had to. Here about 3 years ago, I guess, 2 or 3 years ago, we sold it, and we made some money on it. And split it up with all the kids. And so we're in this building now. After Olive, I married Olive. We lived over at Ashbrook Court for.
Now tell me about that. Didn't my other grandfather build your house for you? Didn't my grandpa, my Archie Cairns, build?
Yeah, yes, he did. He built the one over there on Ashbrook Court. I forgot about that. Yes, he built that for us, and we moved into there in 1964. That was before we bought the cottage up north. But so we lived in that cottage, in that home over there, until 1994, I think it was, 94. We got married in 93, and Olive's knees, she couldn't go up and down the steps. So we decided it was about time we came into this building where there'd be no steps.
Yeah. So how did you find out about my other grandfather, Archie Cairns, that he was a contractor or a carpenter?
Well, Larry was going with
With my
Lois.
mom?
Yeah, he was going with her, and we found out he was a mighty good builder and built things well. And so I talked to him, and he said, "Well, we could build a house for you. I guess we could." He says, "You get a lot where you'd like it." And so we chose that lot over there. There's 3 or 4 lots right in a row, and we chose one. And so the next year he built it for us. And it was a lovely home. We liked that. He built it real well. But then we moved over here, and then in 98, I guess it was 98, we moved into here. Yeah, and we've been here now since about 8 years, going on 8 years. Yeah. So we're very pleased with it. We don't have any lawn mowing or snow plowing or grass
good.
mowing, anything else. It's very nice. And
Now, a question I wanted to ask you about that I just thought of. I remember you telling me when you were younger, your dad took you on a trip somewhere to the States. It was like a family reunion.
yeah,
Was that right? And you went somewhere and you remember there was like some old family tree on the wall.
oh yes, that was down at. It was in Pennsylvania. There were a lot of Schuylers down there, and we got a letter one day, came to my grandfather Schuyler from Pennsylvania. What's the name of this town? And it was from Schuyler's, and it said
Was it Turbotville?
Turbotville. Yeah. It was addressed to any Schuyler in Ontario. Well, they sent it to my grandfather because she's about the oldest Schuyler around. And he opened it up, and it was somebody saying that they were in Fostoria, and they named off relatives and so on, and seeing if we were relatives of them, and we turned out we were, so that they could trace the relationship back. So they said, well, come on down. We have each year we have a family picnic, and we've got a family tree there, and we put your names on it if we can trace the relationship out. So the next year, my grandfather and grandmother and my dad and Harold and I went down. There's an old Model T Ford, and we left at 5 o'clock in the morning, and we got down. I think it was 365 miles. We got down there in one day for an old Model T Ford. I guess we drove from 5 o'clock in the morning to maybe 10 at night, but anyway, I remember pulling off the side of the road where my grandmother made up lunch, and we had some lunch there, and then went on and didn't have any problems or anything. And so the next day or two, we visited around with some of the people and got to realize that we were members of the family. So we went to picnic because it was just coming up. And they had this big family tree on the wall there, and names all on the branches and so on. So we had our names added to the tree. It's there somewhere. But and then later on, we heard of Schuylers down in Perth Lamboy, New Jersey. And his name was Ed Schuyler. He had a son called Gösta. I think it was spelled G-O-S-T-A, but they pronounced Gösta, Swedish. His mother was kind of a Swede. And so they invited us down. We went down to their place one time. But we could never really just exactly pick up a relationship with them. We thought probably, but we really couldn't. Although I remember my dad said that 7 mayors of Albany, New York, were named Schuyler. I do remember him saying that. I don't know how I got that information from something down in New York State somewhere. But that's the story on the Schuylers, I guess.
Now, who's the oldest relative that you can remember?
Well, my grandmother Schuyler, like Wesley Schuyler's wife Sarah, was 99 when she passed away. Yeah, and she and her husband Wesley, they lived in Waterford. They sold this farm out near Hagersville, near Jarvis, and we went out to see the farm here a few years ago, and the whole farm has been kind of turned into a village now. And where the house was, I remember going there. I was alone. I think Nellie may have not been living then, but anyway, I went out to see this, and the home was a brick house, lovely brick house. It was just burning down. They were switching it over to be a kind of a town, and they wanted to get rid of this house and so on, some of the barns and building, and it was just burning down. Gosh, I felt kind of
Sad.
bad after being in that building and having so many good times. But anyway, now they've got a huge big building for seniors. Must be 100 apartments, I guess, or so on, built right on that same foundation. Well, it's got rid of the foundation, but same
land.
area.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's quite a going concern now. But
Now, is that where they found all the arrowheads that my dad has?
well, there was on the farm there, back a little further, yeah, a field or two back. They found as he was plowing, every once in a while it'd turn with soil over and there'd be an arrowhead. Must have had some war battle or something in this field, I guess, sometime or other. So he had a little box of arrowheads, well, like that, and he must have had 25 or 30 arrowheads in there. And that, I don't know where they are, whether Larry got them.
Yeah, my
has he
dad's
got
got them.
now? Yeah. Yeah.
So there's Wesley and Sarah.
Wesley and Sarah Schuyler.
So what were they like? Like, you told me where they lived and everything.
Yeah, well, they had Roy and Violet were their 2 children. Violet married this Tom Blaney, and my dad married Cora Howard. They were always good to us kids. My grandparents on my mother's side, John Nelson Howard and Jane Holbrook, they were always good to us kids. My grandfather Howard would always have a bag of candies for us kids. When we came down, he had them up in the drawer, and he'd get them up and said, "Now, what do you have, a red one or a green one?" You just say what you'd have, and you could reach in and pick out what you wanted. We thought that was pretty nice, you know.
Would you get to visit your grandparents often, or they just live
Oh,
too far away?
We would go down for a week, maybe in the summer.
With your parents, or just the kids?
Well, we just, the kid, Harold and I don't remember my sister going with us. She was younger, 2.5 years younger, and Harold and I would go down. I guess maybe Doris was home with our parents. I don't remember her being. Harold and I always played together, but I do remember when Jan got through and got her first job. She boarded at the YWCA in Brantford, and she worked in some office. But she bought Harold and I a Hawaiian guitar, and we strummed on that for a long while, but we never really learned to play it very much. So then she bought us an auto harp. You know what they are?
Yeah.
And you could strum them and press.
Push the
Yeah,
buttons.
I liked that. And we could play tunes on that. But the Hawaiian guitar, we never.
Who bought you the Hawaiian guitar?
Hey?
Your grandma bought you the Hawaiian?
No, my sister.
Oh, your sister,
My
Doris.
sister,
Okay.
Doris, yeah, she bought. When she got her first money, I thought that was so kind of her to do
Said
that.
yes.
Yeah.
Now what? Okay. Here's a question about my dad. So how did Grandma tell you that she was pregnant?
I don't think she ever did. It just happens.
One day she had a big belly, and it was
Yeah.
like, oh.
I guess. No, I don't remember.
How did you pick their names? Was there, or were they just names you happened to like? Like, Dad's middle
Yeah.
name is Howard,
Yeah.
but
I guess we just like the name Larry. I don't know.
Grant, and Janice.
Well,
you
Grant was Nellie's brother was Grant Meisner, and he lived in Chicago, and
A veterinarian.
it's a name that you couldn't
wasn't very common.
what do you call it? when you-
Nickname? Nickname?
Mimic.
Oh yeah, okay.
And so we kind of like that name and chose that. Grant Roy, he is. Roy after my dad. But Doris, my sister, her name is, second name is Laureen. I don't know where that name came from. Doris Laureen Schuyler. She lived to be 75 and she got leukemia. Died of leukemia. But
Yeah. Now, I know you've told me this before too. Why, I know the answer, but why didn't you have to go to war?
oh, well, they wanted all the farms producing all the crops they could get for the war effort, you know. And so they wouldn't take anybody that was younger than 18. I think it was 18. Anybody that age or must stay at home. And I don't know about town boys, but country boys, they wanted them to stay on the farm. Yeah.
And then, so didn't you work at Penman's Clothing?
Yeah, well, to make ends meet, why, Harold and I, when we weren't pruning apple trees during January and February, it was too cold. So we went to Penman's and said, have you got any jobs here? Oh yeah, they said we could use you in here. We said it'd only be for a couple of months because we got to get out and prune. Well, they said, come in and we'll get you a job. So we went in one day and they said, well, now we're going to, what we're making is khaki cloth for the soldiers' uniforms. And we make this cloth and then send it out to be made up. And so they had big trays. They're on wheels, and they'd be as wide as from here to the window and as long as from here to the other wall. Huge big tray, piled up with all kinds of old cut up cloth and so on. Well, any old cloth
Scraps?
of any kind. Sharp, some pieces were sharp. And they said, now we want you to take that cloth and on this big table in the center here, which was on wheels, We want you to just put it on chunks, break it up, put it on, scatter it all over, and then every so often we put some liquid on this, spray liquid, and put another layer on. When we got that layer, we'd ring a bell and they'd come in and spray it until they got about that deep. Then they'd wheel that off into some other room and we never saw it again. But they'd churn that all up and make cloth out of it for the soldiers' garments. That's why they're so darn picky. You know, Fred Blaney, he was called up for the war because he was going for
Pharmacist.
to be a pharmacist, and he put on one of these suits, and he had to quit. He couldn't wear it. He was just so picky. He
Yeah.
went to them, and they said, "Well,
Must have been
you
allergic
just
to it.
can't be a soldier." Then.
Lucky
So-
for him.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, that's good. And what other question? You were talking about all the ladders on your farm, and I remember a couple years ago, you, Dad, and we all went out to the farm, and there's these old ladders. Didn't you say they were like built from an old airplane
Well,
or
yes,
something?
we made. Well, the apple trees were about 18 feet high. We cut them off and kept them that high, and we had to have more ladders because we were getting a lot of orchard, and we needed 20 men to come and pick apples. So after the war was over, these airplanes were over at Brantford Airport. We could actually see the airport from our orchards. And they announced or put in the paper that anybody could have an airplane. So Harold and I said, let's go over and see what they look like, and maybe we get some rungs in these planes, the aluminum rods that went here and there and braced the frames, and maybe we cut some out and make ladders for our ladders we wanted to make. So we went over, and gosh, there's all kinds of planes there, and you went in there, and the walls were all made of these rungs and just kind of cardboard or something. The sides were, you just poke that out, and then you cut these rungs out, just the length they wanted. So we cut maybe 200, I suppose, rungs. And then we brought them home, and then we bought scantling in 2x4, 20 feet long, a bunch of them, 40. We were going to make 20 ladders. And brought them home, and we drilled holes. Every ladder, the rugs were about that far apart all the way up. Maybe there'd be 20 steps in a 20-foot ladder. Drilled holes in the side so that these rungs would go in these holes, and then put rods through, about 3 rods, tighten them up, and that held everything tight. So we made up about 20 ladders, painted them all up red. And then they said, you can have even the engines of these planes if you want them. So Lou Depew, this friend of ours, he said, why don't we go over and each get an engine? Just for the heck of it, just take it apart and look at it. So he brought his big trailer over, and we took our big trailer over. And we went over, and they were all right in the plane. We had to cut them out. They were big circular things. They're that wide apart, a round circle. The pistons and the cylinders are all the way around. Big circle, but they're only about that thick. So we started cutting rods and stuff out and backed the rack in underneath, and so that it settled down on the rack. And we each got an engine. Well, then we started home, and we had to cut we got the engines home, but then we said, let's go home or go over and get a fuselage. And after these engines were off, the fuselage was pretty light. So we had to go over and cut the wings off. Well, the wings were all made of plywood. It wasn't steel, really. So we had big hatchets or axes or something, chopped away and cut them off just outside the fuselage. Then we, it still has wheels under it, so we tow it home behind the tractor. Got down to, we had to cross this creek called Whiteman's Creek, and there's a little bridge just for the width, one amp car had to go through it at a time. Got down the bridge, by George, these stubs of the wings were too wide to go through. So we had to cut them off again, back further, chop and chop and chop. We finally got them back chopped off so we could get through and pull one up to our place. Lou took his right into Paris and down the highway. And he had to go halfway down to Brantford from Paris, about 4 miles on the highway. I don't know what the cars behind him thought.
But what would you do with this thing?
We'll just put it out beside the end of the orchard where you go out and play in it and do anything we wanted. It was a kind of place to get away from our wives when they got mad at us.
Your second home, I bet.
Oh, we had lots of fun.
How did you guys meet each other? It was down in Florida, right?
How did we? Who introduced us?
Well, we'd both been widowed in 1989, and neither of us really intended to remarry. We were quite content. We both had found ways to keep busy, and we were quite content with the lifestyle we had. And then mutual friends invited us over to play dominoes. We were in Florida for the winter, lived just one street apart, and had mutual friends, but our paths had just never crossed. And when in the park, we usually played cards at night or did some activity at the clubhouse. But friends of his from Paris that I knew and that he knew as well said, come over and play dominoes. And I played dominoes as a child, but this was a little more refined dominoes. You know how the dominoes we played at the cottage, same sort of thing. And so before we started, Howard took a minute to tell me how to play, not only how to play, but how to win. So of course I was impressed. I thought, everybody else is out there trying to beat the winner, and he was more interested in making sure that I had an equal chance to win. So that impressed me. And then we went to, not together, but we went to one of the potluck suppers in the clubhouse on, it was Valentine's party in February, and they were playing all these golden oldies as a sing-song. And I was singing along, and I heard this whistling behind me. Someone was whistling right on key, just beautiful whistling. And I turned around, and of course it was the card-playing fellow, the domino-playing fellow behind me. And he was having the same couple in to play cards or dominoes or something at his place after the supper. The supper started at 5, and the evening was over by 7 o'clock, so usually friends would get together and play something afterwards. And I had a friend, a nurse from Windsor, from Toronto, was visiting me. She was a supervisor in a retirement home there, a nursing home. And I said, I don't know whether Mary Margaret would like to play cards or not. And he said, well, ask her. So I did, and she said, oh, sure. So we went over and played dominoes or cards. And then when friends of ours found out that we had played cards together, they invited us. And we started out just being friends. And we played in the same group, and then found that we liked a lot of the same music. And he went to church every Sunday. Not to the same church I did, but we found we had a lot of things in common, and music especially, I think. And Howard, I could tell, had a strong love of family. One of the things he did the first night was show me pictures of your new home out in Campbellville, and pictures of the family. It wasn't too long after Christmas.
I was trying to get you in.
He had a joke that he played on me in Lakeland. I found out then that he was a practical joker. He had a car that had a little button under the license plate, and if you touched that, the trunk would open. And he'd walk over to the trunk, and seemingly without unlocking it, the trunk would open. And I said, well, how do you do that? He said, well, it reacts to the sound of my voice. And I said, well, how does it know it's your voice? Well, it just does. So for the longest time, I thought that his trunk really did open that way. And then finally, just before we came home, he showed me this button under it. I thought it was a huge joke. So I also knew he had a sense of humor, which I appreciated in
I'd
a
forgotten all
fellow.
about that. That's news to me now.
I think he came down to Leamington for Patrick's christening, and he stayed with the friends, mutual friends of ours that we played cards with in my hometown. And he stayed with them over the weekend. And then the next time I came, he said, well, if you get off the train in Oakville, I'll bring you and I'll show you my home in Milton. So I did. And then it wasn't much long after that he asked me to marry him. And I
Was that on the 19th of May or something?
something like that. That's how early it was. And Janice was conducting a tour through the States, and she was going in August. And he said, well, we could be married and we could go on this bus trip. And I said, well, no, I couldn't do that long bus trip because I had arthritis, and I said, I don't think I can do that. Well, we'll get married anyway. And I said, well, I was thinking that we would just wait and, get to know each other better and get married. No, I think we should be married in August. So I agreed. Oh, that's it.
The rest is history.
Yeah.
All right, so down to my last 3 questions. Of all the things you learned from your parents, what do you feel was the most valuable?
Well, to be honest and true and try and live an upright life and go to church regularly. And I guess that was the best thing we learned, yeah.
That's good.
I guess maybe.
And of all your accomplishments, what are you the most proud of?
Marrying my wife here. She's the best one right here.
Mr. Sweet Talker.
Yeah.
Well, I think you're very proud of your family.
Oh, I'm very happy. Very happy. I've got 3 lovely grandchildren by my son, and I've got how many great
You
grandchildren?
got 3 and a 4th one
3
on
and
the
a
way.
4th one on the way. So I'm very fortunate. And then let's see. Haven't I got more grandchildren than that on some of them?
Well, you've got some step-grandchildren. You've
Yeah,
got
I've
6
got
of those.
step-grandchildren, all those step-grandchildren.
Yeah, some of whom
But-
don't know any other grandfather. He is grandpa.
That's good.
No, I've been very happy. My wife's made me very happy, and we've had a happy life together, haven't we?
Yes.
Now, I remember the last time I was here, and I can't believe this, but you said you've never had a drop of alcohol in your life. Is that
No, I
true?
never have. I've never had it. If I did, that's because I didn't know about it or something, but I never, as far as I've never had a drop of alcohol, because I've never, is wine got alcohol in it?
Some does.
Yeah,
Does it? I don't think I've ever had a glass of wine that
I don't think.
I know of.
I don't think
I've
you
had
have.
one cigarette though. I had, well, no, one draw on a cigarette. I remember this chap was herding some cattle down the road, and these cattle were pasturing along the road because he didn't have a very big farm, and he needed some extra pasture, so he pastured them along. It was just a country road then in front of the farm, and he would drive the cows along, and we kids would run out and talk to him and walk along with him, and he'd sit down and let the cattle pasture for a while, and then they'd walk along. And so he had cigarettes. He'd smoke, and he says, "Why don't you try a cigarette?" Gosh, I thought, wouldn't be mine. I'd like to try that. So I just took one puff and started to cough and spit, and I never touched a cigarette again. That's
That's
my
good.
first and last, I guess.
So, one last question, Grandpa. What is the one thing you want people to remember about you?
That's a good one, isn't it? I don't know what I'd remember. Nothing too important, I guess. I can't think of anything I'd really especially want. I've always tried to be kind to other people, and they've always been pretty kind to me, so I have not too much to worry about. It's a nice life. I've enjoyed my life very much. I've been so thankful to live in Canada, even to live in Ontario, and I've moved several times. My occupation changed occasionally, but it's always seemed to be for the best each time, and I'm very thankful.
All right.
I think that's it.
All right. Thank you very much, Grandpa.
Mhm.